Greetings, Jacob, and greetings to everyone looking in on today's webinar. You're in for something really very special, as I came to learn myself a year ago or so when I participated in a conference at Georgetown University that focused on the protocols of the elders of Zion. One of the seminal texts of conspiratorial anti-Semitism, as we know, is indeed that very book, produced first in Russia, since translated and into many languages, disseminated all over the world, and still causing no end of mischief, no doubt about it. Jacob Kovalio was also at that conference. I had the pleasure of hearing him there. He gave a talk out of his own specialty, which is Asian history. In particular, he's a specialist on the history of Japan, but anti-Semitism studies is not a side interest of his. It's seminal to the work he does, and he really treated all of us at Georgetown to a very powerful lecture accompanied by no end of eye-opening slides that visualized our subject. We've invited him to give a version of that today. Jacob, it's my pleasure now to turn over to you. We all look forward to learning from you.
Thank you very much, Professor Rosenfeld. And I'd like to express my appreciation to you for facilitating my participation in this excellent webinar series. I still have a semi-hard time trying to adjust myself or to get used to the idea that this is a global event that can be held thanks to wonderful technology that we all benefit from. I'd like to say a very warm hello to our colleagues and all other people who are taking in this presentation of mine, and I'd like to thank them all. As the title page suggests here, it is going to be a pictorial tour d'horizon about this very intriguing phenomenon of global conspiratorial anti-Semitism. I thought that, yes, before I proceed, I'd like to mention that the presentation contains an introduction that's just starting momentarily, followed by Japan and Romania as two CA, conspiratorial anti-Semitism case studies, as well as, in the end, samples of recent CA developments and other what I call vignettes. So in context, I thought that this very brief sample of round anniversaries of sorts of major CA events would be a good, I wouldn't call it, well, appetizer is a word that comes to mind, but anyway, interest. Beginning with the first documented case of the blood libel, the William of Norwich, 888 years ago, followed by the very well known as well Black Death Plague, 675 years ago. The Dreyfus treason libel affair started in 1894, 130 years ago. Last but certainly not least, 1924, publication of the most popular Japanese edition of the protocols, here on the far right on my side, by Shioden Nobutaka, in other words, a centennial of sorts. In the middle is the very interesting publication titled The Book of the Kahalo, Kniga Kagala in Russian, by a Jewish Russian Orthodox convert named Yakov Brafman. The content and the overall ambiance of the publication, which came out in 1869, has protocol style references, remarks, and documents at least 40 years, slightly less than 40 years, let's say about 35 years before the appearance of the first version of the protocols in 1903. It's of interest to all of us that at the center or the core of Brafman's attack is or was the AIU, the Alliance Israélite Universelle, that had been established 9 years earlier in 1860 by Adolphe Crémieux, the first Jewish minister of justice in the French government and a very prominent Jewish community leader as well as intellectual. The Alliance Israélite Universelle had absolutely nothing to do with any unsavory plots. It has been, ever since, one of the most successful Jewish education networks, schools that is, in the world. Its two main important elements or components are Jewish history and, of course, Hebrew, combined with and another emphasis on French culture and, of course, French being the lingua franca of the network. I would like, as part of this introduction, to just say a few words about generic and, on the other hand, CA, conspiratorial anti-Semitism. Generic anti-Semitism emerges from one or more sources. One, deliberate indoctrination, factual ignorance about Jews, Judaism, Zionism, and Israel, negative experiences involving Jews, individual or group self-interest, from religious to strategic, envy and mental problems. In this context, I really have sort of drawn a lot of encouragement, as it were, from a not very well-known essay written by none other than the opening speaker of the Zionist Congress in 1897. I'm talking about a medical doctor named Carleton University. The title of the essay is Symptoms of the Anti-Semitic Disease of the Mind. No nation is completely anti-Semitic or free from anti-Semitism. Therefore, every nation or larger group, without exception, contains pockets of anti-Semitism. Jewish or Israeli anti-Semitism most certainly do not legitimize the phenomenon. Let me just switching to CA, religious Jew hatred is the millenarian foundation of anti-Semitism, from false ancient conspiratorial imputations of deicide, blood libel, host desecration, the Black Death libel, on top of which, over time, racial, Marxist, modern conspiratorial layers, anti-Zionism, anti-Israelism, Shoah denial and trivialization, Jewish nationhood and statehood denial, Palestinianism, were gradually added since the 19th century. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion is the blueprint of a deliberate and true Russian conspiracy about a purported Jewish conspiracy for world domination through hidden means, first publicized in Russia in 1903, and the contemporary ideological cornerstone of CA. The Protocols is a socio-cultural and political outgrowth, in my opinion, of the popular Russian Orthodox saying, "Udarij Jida, spasi Rossiyu," which means hit the kike and save Russia. Any entity can use it. Malaysia and South Africa are only two contemporary and very recent cases. Since the Soviet Union, while formally banning the protocols, which circulated underground and then openly after 1991, was the fountain of Marxist anti-Zionism, political anti-Semitism, it is my view that Russia is the source and top purveyor of modern global conspiratorial anti-Semitic ideology. I consider CA to appear in two versions, as it were, scapegoating, therefore CSA, as in the Protocols, or the 2017 Charlottesville Jews Will Not Replace Us riot, which may exist on its own, or turn eliminationist, CEA, as in Nazi, Romanian fascist, or jihadi ideologies. Under this title of Conspiratorial Anti-Semitic Propagandists, I thought that I would very briefly refer to those I consider to be most influential. Marx's 1843 piece on the Jewish question, I consider the sort of some kind of a reflection of a popular German saying of the Jews are our misfortune, which was popular from Treitschke to Streicher and beyond that. Krusevan, so Pavel Krusevan's Namia in September 1903 included excerpts of the protocols. Niels's The Big and the Small had the protocols as appendix in 1905. We can see it on the bottom left of this slide. The International Jew was actually written by Ford employee and advisor, as well as British Israelite William Bill Cameron. Hitler's Mein Kampf is, among many other things, important for being a bridge of sorts, if you will, from CSA to CEA, and I'll stop at that. Stalinism contributed anti-Zionism and anti-cosmopolitanism campaigns, as well as the fake Jewish doctors plot towards the end of Stalin's life. Turning the protocols into art of sorts, through a TV series, I have to consider a unique Muslim achievement. Erdogan's anti-Semitism is representative of most, though not all, Muslim leaders. The Marsden translation that appears on the bottom of the slide is the most popular English rendition of the protocols. In the context of 710 in particular, I consider these four most impactful sources, thus mana of sorts, of conspiratorial anti-Semitism. Of course, I have left out for reasons of logic, if you will, the far right, the David Duke style of Jewish, or, well, the David Duke style of anti-Semitism. So mana number one, Palestinianism, victimist and eliminationist anti-Semitism. Again, I'm going from left to right on the upper side and then the bottom side as well. Followed by non-Jewish and Jewish Marxist anti-Semitism, Black American, BLM in particular these days, and South African anti-Semitism. And last, Jewish fundamentalist religious anti-Zionist anti-Semitism. Just a brief sort of reintroduction with the source of what we are talking about. We have on the left the Russian Orthodox priest at a Cossack conference in Siberia in 1919, referring to Jewish purported domination of the United States. Americans, do you know who they are, these Americans? Wilson, America, the YMCA are all Jedi, Hikes, as are the Masons. Scratch Wilson and you'll find a Jew, and vice versa. Is it clear? Since 1990, or in 1990, the organization whose emblem appears on the right, Pamyat, meaning memory, has been one of the most influential in the field in Russia. Pamyat describes itself, as the emblem states, as the National Patriotic Front. Immediately after the First World War, one of the most influential, well, certainly at least popular, conspiracy theory writers was Ernesta Webster. On the left, we have a very short but telling excerpt from her Secret Societies and Subversive Movements. Jewish power is perhaps the most important problem with which the modern world is confronted. To which Winston Churchill, in a very well-known piece from the Illustrated Sunday Herald of February 1920, reacted, first of all, by congratulating Mrs. Webster, and then referring to, and I quote, "This band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America, who have gripped the Russian people by the hair of their heads and have become practically the undisputed masters of that enormous empire." By 1928, of course, there would come to an immediate end, not that it was reality before that, and after 1937, even less so. Which brings me to the first of two CA cases. CA in Japanese, in Japan, the impact of the protocols. I'd like to share a personal experience, very brief one, of course. My interest in Japanese anti-Semitism, considering what Japan is, came as a direct result of the encounter of this book on the left, the title of which from top to bottom reads The Jewish Peril, the Jewish Threat, Yudayaka. And since then, I have been collecting materials about this, very interesting and challenging. This is the way in which I look at Japanese anti-Semitism for reasons that will become clear very soon, I hope. I have arguably the richest personal collection of Japanese anti-Semitic materials anywhere. In any event, here's our first encounter with the topic at hand. So on the left, The Jewish Peril by Kitagami Baiseki. In Japan, there's a very strong tradition of people using pen names, nom de plume. So Kitagami Baiseki was actually Higuchi Tsuyanosuke. And then on the right, my own Russian Protocols of Zion in Japan. The reason I insisted that the title would include Russian is that many a person, haven't done any, quantitative research on this, do not connect the protocols to Russia. Overall, as a momentary but still telling remark, I'd like to emphasize that given its religious, Shintoist, and Buddhist tradition and history, Japan's CA, though nasty and highly aggressive, is always, including the period of the Second World War, rhetorical. CSA did not become CEA. And here's an example of a very early reference at the highest levels of Japanese journalism as well as political leadership. This is, of course, an excerpt from an article that appeared in the most important, not only regular, but also intellectual weekly in Japan, Chuo Koran, the central publication, roughly translated. So here is what the article says. We are elated to welcome back His Imperial Highness, the Crown Prince, Hirohito, the future emperor, knowing that our serious fears that he might be hurt by violent Koreans or Jewish plots did not materialize. Speaks for itself. When it comes to the period until the end of the Second World War, one of the most active, I would say that since he became a politician as well, General Shioden Nobutaka was a most influential figure. The political vignette that I'm mentioning, that in 1942, he was the top vote getter in Japan, in the country, on a platform, just 1 point platform, saving Japan from Jewish domination, speaks for itself. And as mentioned earlier, his translation is the most popular in Japan, but there are 9 others. Throughout the period between 1935 and 1945, it can be said that CA practically penetrated all walks of life in Japan, including something as unexpected would be the word, protocolized children's books by none other than Yamanaka Minetaro, by far the most successful, the most important, influential children's books writer. And I'll just read one little excerpt from what we have here. Turning all monarchies into republics and then bringing them under Jewish domination is the final aim of the Zion Alliance that's referred to in the other little section. This is a real global conspiracy. The head of Zion Alliance in the Far East is Red Devil Bazarov, was actually a Jewish arms dealer, who's been crisscrossing Manchuria and Mongolia, hatching plots for the destruction of the one Asian empire, Japan. And next to last, the second Jewish state the first being Palestine, is being built as we speak, the Soviet Union. Wartime Japan was characterized domestically by a tsunami of CA publications. At the national level, they were coordinated by an arm of the Gaimusho, the Japanese foreign ministry, the most important representative publication of that being Kokusai Seikei Gakkai, which translates International Politico-Economic Scholarly Organization. That included original Japanese content, if you will, but also many translations from the German in particular, as well as other Italian and Spanish, some Romanian translations as well. Atago Hokuzan, Professor Okutsu Hikoshige, then Japan's leading German language and history specialist, was a most prominent contributor, as was Japan's former ambassador to Italy, Shiratori Toshio, and again Shio, then we've seen before. Throughout the war, Japanese military engaged in Jewish conspiracy propaganda in Muslim Southeast Asia. They were very successful there, as well as by radio to Australia. Last but certainly not least, Josef Meisinger, the so-called, also known as the Butcher of Warsaw, became Gestapo attaché at the German embassy in Tokyo in 1942, and he stayed there for 3 years. Despite his very assiduous attempts, he failed to get Japan to exterminate 35,000 Jews that were under its jurisdiction in Japan and China. To connect these days to those days, in Kindle format, it is immediately possible to order every single important publication of those times. Again, of course, at Amazon JP, from right to left. A very significant but different version of the Protocols, followed by Henry Ford's The International Jew. Freemasons as the most, about the secret organization of the Freemasons by Shio, then, that we've mentioned earlier, and his other contribution, Jewish Thought and Actions. At the end, supposedly legitimate research, just titled Jewish or Research About Jews, by a very important Japanese enterprise, government enterprise actually, in Manchuria, that was supposed to advise the Japanese government how to deal with Jewish conspiracies. Leading post-war CA writer is former teacher Masami Uno, extremely prolific. He achieved fame and fortune originally in the mid-1980s with the second and third books or images from the upper left. Know the Jew, or Know Jews, if you will. It's possible to translate that either way, and you'll understand Japan. And then Know the Jews and you'll understand the world, followed by titles such as The Invisible Global Jewish Empire. And then how to emphasize the role that Jews play in a process that he considered to be afoot, the second book on the bottom left, the day that US dollar will become paper worthless. And as one can expect it, he contributed significantly to anti-vaccination. He's an anti-vaxxer, as one would expect. But on the far right of the bottom line is a book that I've referred to as Japanese Israelism. In other words, as British Israelism exists, there is a body of work in Japan that those who write on it have been very financially successful, and that is the idea that actually the Jews, and by extension Christianity, actually emerged in Japan, in northern Japan of all places. There's been a very interesting, joint venture of sorts between UNO and the LaRouche organization in the United States. And the book on the left is titled Confessions of Jews by Paul Goldstein and Jeffrey Steinberg, which was published by UNO in 1990. Here's the introduction, some of the introduction. Since 1945, America has become America of the Jews. US-Japan economic frictions actually are frictions between Japan and the Jews, and so on and so forth. They actually, Goldstein and Steinberg, suggested that UNO undertake this project, which he did. And I'm moving down to the fourth line from the bottom. Subsequently, Goldstein and Steinberg went to work for UNO, editing the English edition of his New American View, with fellow American, purportedly ex-CIA man in the middle, sitting Victor Marchetti. Canadian journalist and naturalized Japanese citizen Benjamin Fulford is a phenomenon of very significant nature, I think. He is originally, professionally a journalist, but he moved to Japan decades ago, and he found fame and fortune as what I call here protokolchik. And because I don't think that there's any necessity for me to spell out what it is that he is writing about, I'm just going to read out a little bit of what is on the right. But before that, I'd like to mention two examples of his book production. The one on the right, Feminism and Homosexuality Threatening the Human Race, and left of there, Understanding or Explaining the World's Dark Rulers. Now, I will read, as you can see, this post is from December 22nd, 2023, about what, a month ago. And I'm specifically going to focus on the middle section of the excerpt on the right. Abe Shinzo was installed after the 2011 Fukushima attack on Japan, after which he bragged at the WEF Davos that Japan was going to attack China and divide it into 6 separate nations. Taiwan will become part of Japan, and China will integrate with India and become the center of the world economy. Nothing of this is actually true at all. The attack of sorts on March the 3rd, 2011 was a devastating tsunami, earthquake and tsunami that everybody knows. And as well, those who would like to know what it is that Abe Shinzo was all about can do no better than go to freeandopenindopacific.net, my website, and will see that he dealt with China in the exact opposite direction, nothing even remotely suggesting an attack on China and so on. And some bizarre addition to Fulford's contributions. On the bottom left, coronavirus trail leading to Netanyahu. And on the right, the Khazarian mafia. Khazarian should be an accurate pronunciation. Supposedly, the Khazarian mafia stranglehold of the world in the hands or centered upon the Rothschild and Rockefeller families, who are hiding in Zug, Switzerland, of all places, and are in contact with the White Dragon Society to negotiate a surrender. I don't think I'm going to add anything to this because it's so imaginary, just to use a fairly neutral term, that I would just move on. But not before explaining what the origin of this Khazarian business. It is, for all intents and purposes, the Khazarian and Khazarian mafia stem from a deliberate conspiratorial distortion of the 12th century book by Yudayaka, in the middle of the slide. And it's been used as a tool for the delegitimization of the Ashkenazi community as non-Jewish, for supposedly being descendants of the Khazarian converts to Judaism and not of so-called biblical Jews. Kessler's book on the right, The 13th Tribe, expressed that concern. As expected, UNO did exactly that. Historically, the Khazarian kingdom did exist in an area between the Black Sea and the Caucasus, but I'll leave it there unless there will be questions. Here we have C.A. CSA convert, Otaryu, a Trotskyite turned radical Japanese nationalist, ultra-nationalist and anti-Semite. His CA titles include, for example, what appears in the middle of the slide, The Jewish Plan for the Occupation of Japan, as well as diet books. And on the right, Benjamin Fulford and Ryu, in a book format that is very popular in Japan, the two exchanging views on all kinds of conspiracy theories, and this type of book sells very well in Japan. Matsumoto Chizuo, Asahara Shoko, formerly as leader of a very peculiar Buddhist organization, was an uneducated, fake Buddhist leader whose strange charisma attracted highly educated followers. In 1992, he issued a CA-style declaration of war against Jews, which appears in the second excerpt on the right, which is indicative of his mental state, I dare say. His 1995 attack, his gang's attack on the Tokyo transportation system, killed 12 and injured thousands. That only, after many years of wrangling, if you will, and indecision, brought about his arrest and execution in 2018. The 2022 elections in Japan were good for the individual appearing in this slide, who became a parliamentarian, an upper house member. His name is Kamiya Sohei, and his platform was to free Japan from its purported domination by Jewish capital, as the Japanese inscription states. And again, that same election cycle, one Kurokawa Atsuhiko founded the Anti-National TV Annual Fee Party. NHK is the Japanese version of the BBC or the CBC. And he was convinced, Kurokawa, that is, that if he were to fail, it would only be, and I'm quoting the left section of the slide, were I to be murdered, it would only be by Jewish money. Were I to be killed, there must be a fellow Japanese to continue my struggle against annual NHK fees. When you consider his reference to Jewish money and domination, of course, is much longer in the original, and what it was that he connected it to, I think that that Zionist named Lippe is the solution to this activist problem. Hirokawa Ryuichi is a leftist anti-Semitic CA activist, a Japanese Marxist anti-Semitic propagandist masquerading as journalist. He was indoctrinated in anti-Zionism in Israel by Akiva Or of the radical leftist outfit Matzpen, Compass. He married and divorced radical leftist anti-Zionist activist Ruti Yoskovich, who was the daughter of Shoah survivors. He is a convicted rapist. Much worse, Kozo, Okamoto Kozo, and Fusako Shigenobu. This is the second half of the left of the slide. Okamoto, on the upper far right, and two other Japanese terrorists carried out a deadly attack on Israel's Ben Gurion airport in May 1972. 36 innocent Christian pilgrims were killed and 80 wounded. He was a member of the Marxist jihadi Japanese Red Army terrorist gang led by Fusako Shigenobu on the right, which murdered in the service of the Palestinian Arab Marxist jihadi outfit. Shigenobu served Marxist jihadism sexually as well, having a daughter, May, from a deliberate romp with an Arab terrorist. She documented the affair in I Decided to Conceive You Under an Apple Tree, the book on the right. After returning to Japan from Lebanon, she served a 21-year sentence until May 2022 for political terrorism. The Marxist jihadi terrorist establishment and May celebrated the terrorist mother's release after quote-unquote unjust imprisonment, as the poster on the bottom right explains. When it comes to major academic CA practitioners in Japan, none can be more important than on the left, Professor Itagaki Yuzo, and on the right, well, the American naturalized citizen, recently deceased Masao Miyoshi. I must confess to being unable to bring myself to believe that Sugihara Chiune of Visas for Life justified fame, I think we can say, made the statement, although it came my way from a most reliable source. So here it is. Sugihara Chiune himself wrote shortly before his death in 1986 that had he refused the issuance of transit visas, he would have incurred the eternal hatred of the Jewish people who have latent influence throughout the world. Enough said. I do realize that we're almost 40 minutes into this presentation, but again, I'm certainly going to defer to whatever Günther is saying at any point in time.
You can still have
Between the end,
5
I'm
minutes.
sorry?
That's perfectly fine. Yes.
Fine. Again, whatever you tell me
Yes, that's perfectly
how
fine.
to proceed, I will follow right away. Between the end of World War I and 1944, Greater and then Lesser Romania was Eastern Europe's most extreme CSA nation. The Orthodox Church and the Iron Guard, or the legionary paramilitary, were the inspiration, and the Roman version of the German SA, respectively. Here we have Ioan Moța, translator of the Protocols into Romanian. The book appears on the right, and co-founder of the Iron Guard, who died in Spain in 1937, fighting for Franco. Some of Romania's brightest minds were indefatigable CA propagandists and practitioners. From the left, upper left, brilliant Nobel Prize contender chemist Nicolae Paulescu, co-founder with the intellectual scholar and politician Alexandru C. Cuza next to him, of the fascist National Christian Party, which held power briefly in the late 1930s, as seen in the Cuza-Goga, Octavian Goga, regime emblem just underneath. It says Cuza-Goga with the swastika. Then Nikifor Krajnic, a prominent religious thinker and writer and nationalistic poet, Romania, in my view, Romania's Father Coughlin, and Iron Guard ideological luminary Nicolae or Nae Ionescu. Historically, the list must include Romania's national poet Mihai Eminescu, as well as CI activist, religion and cultural specialist, and future University of Chicago star Mircea Eliade. Here are samples of Alexandru C. Cuza's CA work. On the left, text of his testimony in a parliamentary debate in 1918 on the issue of citizenship for Romanian-born Jews, titled, well, the translation is, motamo, the kikes in the war. The title of essay on the right is, of course, self-explanatory. Cuza insisted on the Aryan origins of Romanians, used the swastika as symbol before the Nazis, and pushed the idea of removing all Jews from Madagascar. Corneliu Zelea Codreanu, co-founder of the Iron Guard, was the most charismatic fascist leader. His 1936 protocolist thoughts speak for themselves. On the right here, the movement of the Jewish population and its penetration into Romania are being carried out in accordance with precise plans. In all probability, the Great Jewish Council, whatever that is planning the creation of a new Palestine on a strip of land, starting out of the Baltic Sea, embraces a part of Poland and Czechoslovakia and half of Romania, right across to the Black Sea. As we can see on the bottom of the slide, there is a successor organization to the Iron Guard. It's called the New Right Party, the leader of which is Tudor Ionescu on the bottom of the slide. The short-lived CSA, Ioan Antonescu, Horia Sima, appear on the left here, fascist regime in 1941, morphed into a genocidal CEA Antonescu regime, which together with Germany created the Transnistria forced labor camps on the right there, where I had the privilege of being born in Mogilev Podolsky. China or the Xi Jinping regime have started availing themselves of anti-Semitic tropes and references for about 2 years. Here we have a cartoon where the American Secretary of State Blinken is seen as conspiring to get the UN to find China the source of the Wuhan COVID-19 virus. That has been established as the fundamental truth even before that. In reality, the WHO owes Ghebreyesus on the right shaking hands with the Chinese ruler has been Xi's man since elected to this position as WHO leader in 2017. On the left are the words of a man of integrity, fairness, justice, and historical knowledge. People are scared in this country, the US, to say wrong is wrong because the Jewish lobby is powerful, very powerful. Well, so what? For goodness sake, this is God's world. We live in a moral universe. The apartheid government was very powerful, but today it no longer exists. Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, Pinochet, Milosevic, and Idi Amin were all powerful, but in the end, they bit the dust. The updated reference, much worse, comes from October the 21st, 2023, when Patrice Khan Cullors, co-founder of the BLM Marxist totalitarian, money-grubbing, global imperialist anti-Semitic syndicate, stated the following on the October the 7th Hamas attack on Israel, quote, "Palestine is our generation South Africa, and if we don't step up and end the imperialist project called Israel, we're doomed." Countering Cullors, Larry Elder, a prominent journalist, Black conservative talk show host, and Republican presidential candidate for 2024 said, quote, "BLM is a morally bankrupt organization, and it's been like that since its founding. Cullors' statement on Israel indicate well-known Black Lives Matter's anti-Semitism." Here's America's newest Black CEA replacement propagandist, Ronald Dalton. I'm sure you know, may have seen the movie and online references. CSA in real time, 2017 Charlottesville Unite the Right demonstrators. The Jews will not replace us. In reality, very well documented. It's two very influential French intellectuals and writers, Jean Raspail and Renaud Camus, who are the most important, well, the originators of the replacement theory. The Marx-Muhammad alliance, what connects them are totalitarianism and anti-Semitism. And here is one example of that. The late Muslim Brotherhood leader, Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and British Labour politician, many may know, Red Ken Livingstone. And here's Qaradawi as genocidal anti-Semite and gentle, of course, Islamist missionary. And there's Qaradawi and another leftist friend, Nelson Durban Wan Mandela. Edward Said, extremely important CI jihadi, having been inspired by the Muslim Brotherhood Said Qutb, calling for an Israeli apartheid jihad, as he did less than 2 weeks after 9/11. Quote, "In the American mind, analogies between Palestinian Arabs and South Africa's liberation struggle most emphatically do not occur. We must make those analogies. The Israeli apartheid jihad was launched at Al-Quds University in Jerusalem in 2005 and at the University of Toronto and expanded globally through Muslim Brotherhood leftist outfits on campuses, labor unions, and the media." And here's another contribution by Said to the disuniting of America. I believe very strongly that it's important for those of us who are not part of this state system, again, just for reasons of time, to militate for the disuniting of America using human rights movements and so on that I mentioned there. Every single year at the WSF gathering, slogans of the kind of Viva la Intifada Global and Nazis, Yankees, Jews, no more chosen peoples are heard, always denied. There's an apology, you know, and then, of course, the situation goes back to normality. The entire trend, organization, and policy started in 2001 with Said and Chomsky as keynote speakers. Malaysia's Mahathir bin Mohamad, major, important, influential, absolutely CSA agitator, anti-white racist, Islamization of knowledge jihad originator that I don't think is very well known throughout the world, certainly not outside Malaysia and other entities in that section. And on the bottom, CEA intellectual luminary Shanun Ahmed, again, for reasons of time. In Palestine, the second from the top, the whole country was taken away from the Arabs and handed over to the Jews. And then I tell the Australians, you can't simply decide to be Asian. You must have an Asian culture. This means, for a start, changing your attitude and improving your manners. Asians don't go around telling others what to do. Well, thinking about what he said and what he actually did, one can see a certain problem in thinking. And Malaysia on the bottom, leading Muslim novelist Shanun Ahmed, opposing the screening of Schindler's List, stated, "It is Hitler who should be praised for trying to rid the world of Jews, not Schindler who saved a few of them. Moreover, because the Nazis failed in their attempt, the world today is plagued by consumerism, social upheaval, and the weakening of tradition, all the fault of the Jews." Of course, I'm very much aware of the excellent work by Mary Ainsley about Malaysia. And as I said at the very beginning, this is not a characteristic attitude, if you will, of all Malaysians. Many of them, absolutely. Here is...
Jacob, if you could wrap up in a minute or two so that we have some time for discussion, that would be great.
Yeah. Yes. Well, of course, a reference by a Labour Party member of parliament after they lost the election, and she referred to that loss as being, or well, she referred to that loss as having been caused by the pro-Israel lobby, and poor Jeremy Corbyn, who's actually a member of the South African delegation in The Hague. This is a certain element that exists, and that is Israel, or for all intents and purposes, CEA agitation from the far left and the right in Israel itself. And last but certainly not least, just to give people something to hold or to be aware of. There seems to be quite a bit of ignorance in that regard. We have here a picture of the two prime ministers of Israel, Bennett and Lapid, negotiating with not only MK, Arab MKs have been in Israeli parliament forever from the beginning of the state, but also a very well-known Islamist political leader, Mansour Abbas, that should put to rest, although I'm sure it's not going to do it, any reference to so-called apartheid Israel. I'll draw the line here simply because, well, it's time. Thank you so much.